You are listening to the People-Centric podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, People-Centric leaders. This is Don Harkey from People-Centric here. And I just realized I'm really talking hard in the podcast voice as I open that up. I just realized that there's a podcast voice that sometimes we use, and I think I might be the most guilty of it. Is it just me, Diana? Have you noticed that before?
Yeah, I think it's mostly you. And you just kind of get deeper and you turn into this character of your actual self.
I try to break out of it. I'm trying to break out of it right now. So do I sound a little more normal to myself?
Yeah, this is normal. This is
Okay,
normal.
this is normal. Okay, well, good. I recovered the normal voice thing. So as we talk about what we're going to talk, oh, okay, I just heard myself do it again.
Yeah.
Don't use the radio voice. So we've been hearing an increased number of our clients, the people that we work with, which by the way is like our real jobs on the day-to-day basis. Our real jobs are not just doing podcasts every day. We work with real people struggling through real issues. We are hearing a growing number of people, including frontline supervisors, managers, and executives, asking like basic management questions. Like, how do I manage someone who is just clearly not doing their job, not doing what they're supposed to be doing? And it's very frustrating when somebody's not doing their job, right? So you can see, and I'm not talking about like they could be doing a little bit of performance better, like a little bit better. I'm talking about like they're missing a key component of their job, like Captain Obvious kind of things. Like they're really, really, really missing the boat on something. And so how do I manage through that? Because they're a little bit stumped in the moment of like, why do I have to tell that person to do this? Or why does this have to happen? And they get lost in how do I even deal with this? You can't fix stupid. So how do I fix this? What does that look like?
This is common sense.
This is common sense. So how do I teach common sense to people? What is that? Do I have to really teach people common sense? Is that part of this? So we're going to go through a couple of examples, and we're going to leverage our management cycle, which we're going to introduce to you on basic management. Like, what does basic management of a person look like, and how do we improve what they do? And so we've got Philip on with us here. Philip, I just want to point out because I know, and if you're watching us on YouTube, Philip and I are dressed exactly the same today, and both of us just got haircuts literally today before this podcast was going on. So Philip, looking sharp, dude.
I was thinking you looked so great today. Really, if there's any, management cycle feedback, you're owning it. You're accountable for your great looks today. I appreciate that. It's just what else could we do better? I really don't know. I don't know.
Same to you, bud. You're looking sharp today. You're looking great. And then we also have Diana with us to help us with this topic. Now, Diana, you kind of brought this topic to us because of an experience you had at, we'll just call it a large coffee chain. We'll just throw out like a name. We'll just make up a name for it. We'll just call it Starbucks. So can you tell us a little bit about your mythical
My,
Starbucks
my
experience?
interaction. Actually, Starbucks is my local coffee chain, so I'm just going to put that out
Oh,
there.
that's true because you do live in yeah, and you never bring that up. You never point out that
Mm-mm.
it's your local coffee chain.
My local coffee chain. I don't generally go there very often because there's so much coffee around here. But I did happen to go in the other day, and the interaction I had there was confunding. That's what I'm going to call it. Confunding. That's a good word.
Confunding.
So I'm going to set this up a little bit. About, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, one of the first times I went into a Starbucks, I walked up and the guy said, "How are you today?" And I said, "Hi, I'd like a whatever." Right. And he looked at me and he was like, "I asked you how you were today." And I was like, oh my, it shocked me. And I was like, oh my God, these people are humans. I should not just like walk up and order like a robot. I should interact with these people. And that was sort of ingrained in me at a young age of like, these are human beings and you should interact with them as humans. So I've done that ever since. So I did that 20 years later. I walk into a Starbucks. I walk up to the counter and I'm like, "Hi, how are you today?" And the person behind the counter, young woman, literally did nothing except maybe a few blinks. I know you're probably listening and not watching on YouTube, but it was like
She just stared. She just did
she
nothing.
just stared. She just
Just a
stared.
blank stare. right?
And so I like,
Some are calling it the Gen Z stare, and this isn't a Gen Z episode, but some are calling it the Gen Z stare.
I
If
think
you haven't
that's
heard that, it's a blank look that Gen Zs are kind of known for, unfortunately, of like when something's not computing or they're just waiting for something, they're not giving social clues of what they're looking for. That's just a blank,
just
it's
a
just a stare back.
brick wall stare back.
Okay.
And so I said it again. How are you? And I got the same. And I was like, okay, weird. I felt very awkward. And I just said, okay, well, I guess I'll have, and I put in my order, but I intentionally left out the size because I wanted to know if this human could talk to me. So she tilted her head after I ordered and was just like staring at me like I need more information. And I just tilted my head and smiled back because I'm a pot stirrer and I wanted to know. And she eventually, it felt like a long time. She eventually just said, size. And I chuckled and I was like, olive tall, please. Thank you. And as I walked away, I just like paused and was like, I hope you have the best day ever. She didn't say anything back. She kept on staring. I got my coffee. I watched a very similar interaction happen to the person who ordered a few minutes after me. So like this wasn't me. They weren't mad at me. I didn't like offend them with my looks or something. They just didn't, that's how they were interacting with people. And I walked away thinking, man, that was so weird. And I also have an initial reaction on what I would do as a manager, and then a proper reaction on what you probably should do as a manager. So I thought it was a good topic to think about today because it felt like I shouldn't have to teach human social interaction to a customer service representative. But apparently that might be a thing. So I wanted to talk about basics and how we should interact with those types of things.
That's good. That's good. It's a great example. And we get those examples a lot. Like, hey, my person should have known this. They didn't do this. I mean, I just had a conversation yesterday with a manager and owner of a company who was talking about an employee who was struggling to like on really, really basic, like, should I, how are you measuring me? Like, if I send you, they're selling stuff. And the question was, if I email you stuff, does that count as like a sales email? Like internally, like if I email you something and he had to go like, no, because you're not selling things to me. Like that doesn't increase our sales. If you email me things, I want you to email other people things.
When you say it that way, it seems really obvious.
And it's hard to say like what do you say initially when you see the thing that's so obvious to not sound like because you can hear like the implied response is dumbass. Like, no, dumbass, you should know you why don't you know that? Why
Mhm.
don't you know that? So the question is like, how do you manage somebody who's struggling with that? So let's go to the Starbucks example and let's talk a little bit about like, what does that look like? By the way, I just want to add, like, I go to a lot of Starbucks. Most Starbucks that I walk into, especially like in smaller towns where I'm at, I do not have that experience. People will say hi when you walk in the door. They will say thanks for coming when you leave the store. So I don't think this is a Starbucks systemic issue. So
Yeah.
I wanted to give a shout out to Starbucks there on that. I like to find the Starbucks where I'm at and go
And
there.
like I said, the Starbucks barista, many years ago was the one who was like forcing the interaction on me, which I still to this day greatly appreciate. So, yeah.
Right. It's clearly part of their training and part of what they do. So this person clearly was not following their training. If they were trained in that, now that's a good question. So first of all, let's talk about like the typical manager response. So like one of the things we talk a lot about, like what do managers do when that happens? When we work with a manager, what do we find out the manager does? So we will always ask a couple questions when the manager calls. Let's talk about that.
Well, I'm afraid that a lot of times the manager isn't doing anything at all about it.
You're afraid of that?
I mean, I don't love it, but I think that is a very common response.
The test is we'll have to have a follow-up, Diana. We'll have to send you back to that Starbucks today, recreate the situation, make sure she's there, see what happened. I think a lot of the time, if they haven't said anything to them, we can hear they're a body, they're a person, and that's better than no person because without them, this all comes to a grinding halt. And then the follow-up is like, oh, well, do they know what you think about what they did? Did you share about the Gen Z stare? Did you share about the interaction? And then that's when maybe they'll say, look, well, yeah. I mean, I told them customer service is important. And the follow-up is, did you tell them though, hey, that interaction seemed a little odd, or hey, that seemed like it was a hard day for you, or how did you lead in? And they're like, oh, I didn't say that. If we ask them, does your team member know you're disappointed in their performance or that you would do it a different way? A lot of the time when we dig in, we'll hear them actually say, well, probably not. That's the start of it. A lot of feedback doesn't actually make it all the way to the person who needs the feedback.
Yeah. So the questions we ask are some form of like, do they know it and do they own it, right? Does the other person know that that happened? Which a lot of managers, when we first talk to them, as Diana pointed out, they think, well, they should know it. They were there. And it's like, yeah, but do they know that you know that that didn't go well? And do they realize why it didn't go well? Like, have you pointed it out to them? Have you, like, well, it should be obvious. Well, it should be obvious and is obvious are two different things. And to be blunt about, like we did an informal poll on our team. This is not very scientific, but we asked like what percentage of the time when a manager calls to complain about something an employee did, does the manager admit that, well, I haven't talked to them about that yet? And what our team said is about 90% of the time. 90% of the time, the manager has not had a conversation with them. In fact, if we're really being blunt, and I like to, it's a hazard of our job is I watch management, right? I watch it when I go to hotels. I watch it when I go to restaurants. I'm just watching it happen. And a lot of times what I will see is the manager will not say anything to that employee, but will say something to somebody else. They will say something to another employee, sometimes even the customer, and go like, boy, like that was a super personable interaction, wasn't it? And then maybe even take another step of complaining about an entire generation or people, which other people hear about. And now you're alienating yourself as a manager. Now you're not building trust amongst your team. So unfortunately, that's a really unhealthy response. But it's a very human response to want to complain about it with others because Diana said it, it's not very obvious. So, but the first question is, do they know it? So in the management loop, we've referred to this a couple of times. It's just a very simple map. And the first part about it is you are observing performance. Like, how are things going? That's as a manager, this is where you start your job. I'm watching things happen. Is it happening the way I would expect it to happen? I'm observing the performance. So in this case, the manager, if they saw that interaction or heard about the interaction, then they're getting performance. The second step in that is to give the feedback to the employee. I'm just reporting it back to you. I'm going to reflect reality to you. I noticed that interaction. So what would that look like in the Starbucks example? So if the supervisor, let's say the manager of that Starbucks saw that interaction and pulled the employee aside for a second, said, hey, I want to chat with you for a second, right? Hopefully as close to the interaction as possible, right? If that's possible to do that. And it can be a short conversation. They're going to give feedback. Maybe what does that feedback look like? What did they say?
I mean, I know what I want to say.
I like that you have to acknowledge what do you want to say. You
Like,
dumbass.
yeah, I
Why
want to be like,
just
what is,
give
are you okay? What is wrong with you? Like, that woman was totally pleasant to you and you were weird. That's what I want to say.
that's what you want to say. That's
That's what I
probably
want to say.
that's good. So why not say that?
Well, it's quite condescending and it doesn't actually help anything.
Yeah. I like
You
that. I like that second part especially, right? Like I don't care if you're condescending to your people, except that it's not very helpful. I guess I do care if you're
you
condescending.
do care.
I
You
do
would
care.
never do that to us.
I do care about that part of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the biggest part is that you could feel like doing that, but it's going to put you in a less powerful position as a manager to make an impact. Because if you're fighting them and you're condescending with them, then you're not with them. And if you're not walking with them, you're not going to change them. It's going to be you versus them. It's going to be you're only going to win by overpowering the other person, which means I'm going to be standing next to you to make sure you do this. And as soon as I'm gone, they're going to go back to doing it the other way. So they're not gonna take that ownership of the next steps. So then what do you say?
I was thinking, I liked how you're framing it of, does it help them get where you're wanting them to go? Like, does it help you get where you're wanting to go as a team, as an individual, for your client experience? So I think there's a few different ways you could do it. It sounds like this person is very comfortable. I mean, she doesn't seem like there's any stress. So it sounds like this manager has maybe never mentioned this to the person before, because that feels very status quo. So one team question we always like to ask is like, how do you think that interaction went? hey, come over here. Could you have a couple minutes? How do you think the interaction went? If they're like, what interaction? Like, hey, with that person that just left and that person after them and that third person. If they're like, what do you mean? Then it's helping them see, okay, they're checking in first. Do they understand? Do they see what's happening here? Maybe they are having a bad day. Maybe they just don't know. Maybe they weren't trained on it. So it's one, helping them kind of peel it back. And then second is to help paint a picture of, she said good morning. You didn't say good morning back. There's a couple things here, her size even. Like, would you feel heard? I think reversing it on people is always the best way. Or like, hey, if your friend, your significant other, if you know a little bit about them, like whoever the person is they care about, like if they came in and had that same experience, would you be happy about that? Would you want them to have that? And if it's like, well, no, I want my mom, my grandma, my boyfriend, my whoever to be treated better. You're like, well, yeah, that's what we want to be around here. We want to do this. So try it this way. And then as soon as you see a change, in the direction of more. It may not be that she's an amazing 5-star customer service like representative immediately, but hey, how's it going? If she says that at all to that next customer, like as quickly as you commented on what went wrong, make sure you comment on what's going right and painting a path toward the strengths that they're building. I think that's the kind of interaction that would really help a team like that.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. So the hardest part about management is kind of, Philip, as you were going through of like what you say, the other person could have 1,000 responses back to what you're saying. So we can get flooded with, well, what if she says this? Or what if she says this? Or what if she says this? Or what if she says this? And we get lost in all of those things. So the next step in that management cycle is a question. And this is a question, and this is an observation you can have. And the question is, do they own it or do they not own it? Do they own it or not own it? And that means that the person who you're talking to as a manager, that frontline person who talked to Diana or didn't talk to Diana, who was not transactional, do
Not.
they own it or not own it?
So can we give an example of that just so that we kind of understand what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. So like own it. And so when I say own it, right? Owning it would mean like if they owned it, they might say, "Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd really like I want to change that." Or, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was really concentrating on like the order piece and I forgot about the customer service impact of that. I'll do better." Like that sounds like that's owning it, right? That's saying, "Oh, I want to do better on this thing." Or it might be asking a question of saying, "Well, what kinds of I don't know what to say to the person. What could I say?" Like that's a little bit of owning it. Now, there's a little bit of a difference between what you say in terms of owning it and how you own it, like what you do next. So it's not just what the person replies to you in the conversation, it's also what they do next to it. So if they go back to the counter and they start leaning in and they start greeting people and they start trying to do the right thing, then at least they're owning it to some extent, right? They're starting to lean into it. Not owning it would be they get defensive. They start blaming things of like well, I've had lots of customers that have been mean to me. Why don't you go talk to them? Or hey, Nancy who works here also, and she never does that. The manager the other person that trained me, she's always rude to the customers. Why are you telling me this? Why are you coming on to me? So it's that tends to be not owning it, tends to be deflective, tends to be making excuses for things. They're not really owning it. The reason that own it or not own it is so important, and this puts you in two different directions in this management cycle that we're going to train, is because if the person owns it, then they can change it. If the person doesn't own it, then they're going to clearly resist the changes coming up. And those are two very different outcomes, two very different directions for things. So if the person owns it, if they say, "Oh, I want to get better," then what we train managers to do is now you're in coaching mode. And coaching mode is a very different mode to be. It's a different mindset to be. It's a training mode. I'm going to help you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to ask questions. Philip kind of got into it a little bit in the conversations. Well, tell me about a little bit about, okay, you didn't like how that interaction with that customer went either. Let's think about it from a perspective if you came in, or if your mom came in, or something like that, or somebody that you cared about came in. How would you want to be treated if you were at the customer? Like, let's talk a little bit about that. What you're doing in coaching mode is you're asking questions to allow them to start to engage their own brains on how to solve that problem. You're offering insights, you're offering moments, you're offering a little bit of training, but it's not just telling them what to do differently. You're allowing them to ask questions. And the reason you're doing that is because people will own what they help to create. People will take a lot more ownership as humans if they can ask the questions of saying, well, what kinds, if let's say I'm at the counter and Diana says, "Hey, I didn't like how the interaction went. I saw this." And I'm like, "I didn't like it either." And I started asking questions of like, "Hey, well, what kinds of things could I do to make that better?" Now I'm pulling the information from you and I'm a lot more likely to learn. That's adult learning theory. I'm a lot more likely to learn and the stuff is going to stick for me if they own it. Now, if they don't own it, if I'm starting to make excuses and I'm starting to throw stuff out there, now you're in a different loop. And that loop is accountability. Accountability is different from coaching. Accountability, basically, what you're doing now is I'm not going to coach you into something because you're not asking me any questions. What I'm doing now is I'm reflecting the situation back to you, which means that I'm going to say something like, well, the customer service piece is a huge part of that frontline job. I need to see you do better at that. I need to see you working on that. And I'm going to keep watching to see if it gets better. And then it goes back around. And Philip kind of alluded to this. It goes back around to now I'm going to watch. And I'm going to watch what happens on the next interaction. And if the person does a better interaction next time, I'm going to give feedback on that better interaction, right? Feedback doesn't always just have to be negative. So if the next person comes and she goes up and she's like, hi, how is your day? Let's say she does it that way, right? Like not really owning it, but like, how's your day? I'm programmed to ask that question. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to give the feedback again. Next time I talk to that employee, I'm going to say, hey, I saw the next couple of interactions you had. Now you're asking questions or you're interacting with people. I really like that. That's a really good job. I think that there's a more natural, I think there's a better way that you could also do that. I'm still giving you feedback. I saw it. It didn't really feel genuine. I wonder, does it feel genuine to you? How does it feel to you when you're asking the question? Now I'm going to watch again. Do you own it or do you not own it? Of like, no, it doesn't feel genuine to me. I'm really struggling with this. Okay, that's kind of owning it, right? Now I'm going to say, well, what sounds more genuine to you in terms of interacting with that person? Like maybe you could add your own flair to it. Or if it's, I don't know why you're harping on me on this again, and why aren't you talking to everybody else about this? Now what I'm doing, if I'm staying in that accountability loop, then I am ratcheting up the pressure on it. I imagine a little knob that starts at a 1, just, hey, I saw this bad thing happen. I'm just reporting it back to you, all the way to a 10, which the 10 is you're fired. You're going to get out there. And as that it gets turned up, I'm going to I'm going to ratchet up what we call radical clarity. And radical clarity means I'm going to get increasingly clear about my expectations of you. So if the person's not doing it, or they're not owning it, or they're not improving, then I'm going to keep talking to the person. I'm going to say, hey, I saw another interaction that was exactly like the one before. We can't keep doing that. I will not keep you at this position if you keep doing that. I need you to greet people. I need you to talk to people. I can't keep you in that position. I just saw you do it again. If you continue to do it again, next time I see you not greet a customer, I'm going to let you go. That's increasing radical clarity of when somebody walks in, I need you to engage them. I need you to ask them how they're doing. I need you to have conversations with them. I can't just have you be transactional with that client. And I'm going to continue to increase that. And if they still don't do it, then you're going to promote them to their next opportunity inside of another organization. You're going to let them go because you're protecting your team. Even if you badly need bodies, like I just need warm bodies in there, you're going to let that person go. Why are you going to let that person go when you really badly need people? Because everyone else on your team is watching what you're going to do with that situation. Everybody else on the team sees the bad situation. And what you're doing is you're elevating the entire team and the standard for the entire team so that everybody else performs at a higher level. And when everybody else performs at a higher level, you're more likely to be able to attract really good people into your organization. Because what we know is when somebody goes to apply for a job, they want to see who they're going to work with and what's that going to be like. So that's that accountability loop that you can work through. Now, if it's the coaching loop, give them a lot of time, a lot of grace, a lot of effort. If they're really trying, and they're really trying, not just saying that they want to try, but they're actually trying, that's the employee you want to spend a lot of time with. That's the one you want to coach and say, okay, that interaction felt a little awkward for you. Talk about like, what could you do differently there? Let's talk about some things. And you have conversations with the employee to help them to develop and figure out where they need to go next. That's the management loop. So I know I just talked a lot, but let's talk a little bit about that in application. Philip.
Well, I have a bad example of, I think, someone attempting that loop, but it backfired. Last week, I was in a local coffee shop, not Starbucks. And long story short, I ordered a sandwich and a coffee for there. And then I meant to go. I looked at the clock and realized, okay, after volunteering, I needed to go. So I said, actually, to go. So when they brought the order out, someone from the kitchen, who I think was a manager, very stressed. It was a busy day. She was like, Philip, for here? And I said, oh, excuse me. I was like, could I have that to go? And the person who took my order at the counter looked up instantly, even though they were busy. Her eyes got really big. She looked over at me, and the person who came out of the kitchen with this plate with the pickle and the sandwich and the coffee, she looks over at the people who took the orders with daggers. And I saw clearly there's something going on here. I have walked into the bee's nest. So I said, oh, that was me. I was like, I think I asked for it to here, but a schedule change. I realized I was running later than I expected. I need this to go. And she looked and she said, everyone, this is the person with the plate with the pickle in his hand. She's like, everyone, remember, we need to take orders correctly the first time. And I said, oh, again, this was me. And the person behind the counter was just shrinking, like literally shrinking into herself, and just looked at me like, I have been slain. I've been killed. I've been hurt. So when the lady came back out with to go again, I said, hey, really, it was me. Like, I appreciate that was me there. She's like, you know what? She said, I know, wouldn't have been the first time and it won't be the last. And so what she's getting at is trying to build in more accountability, right? Like, her direction she wants to take the team is good in the sense that she wants them to improve, but she's not leaning into this cycle at all because the feedback is negative. The feedback is, you guys are stupid. Even when I realized that it was the difficult customer who asked for a change, as opposed to your actual order taking, if you're not wrong today, you'll be wrong tomorrow. So my feedback to you is, I don't actually think you can do this better, and I will yell at you in front of a customer no matter what. As opposed to your point on, like, if it's accountability, it's like, hey, like the feedback system of how it goes, and are you owning it? And that team member clearly was, like, owning it so much that she was so aware while she was taking an order for someone else, she heard me say, oh, that's to go, and was honed in. But that manager missed it and is really beating this team member into the ground as opposed to like developing alongside them.
Yeah, and that's the hazard of working in the wrong loop, right? So that person was working in an accountability loop and they probably should have been working in a coaching loop, right? And being careful about that feedback. And, all the other piece that really failed there is where you have those conversations. You don't, there's the old adage of like, like recognize in public and criticize in private. I think it's actually a little bit too simplified. There's times when you don't want to recognize in public. Some people don't like public recognition. So I think that you want to be careful about that. And there's sometimes where you do criticize in public. If somebody's going to do something in front of an entire team, sometimes there's moments where it's good as a manager to say, like, that's unacceptable and that's not going to happen again. Don't do that. So the whole team can hear that. But criticizing in front, like an issue like that, where you might be, good communication only happens when you might be wrong. That manager was wrong about that interaction. The process didn't fail. Like, the customer just changed their mind on something. Like, so they you should go into it a little bit humbly, and that's why you open up the conversation a little bit with, like, if they hadn't had that conversation in front of you, Philip, they could have gone and said, like, hey, let's break that down. Like, what happened there? I heard that they had to change the order again, and we've been working on that. Clearly, they've been talking about that, and then there could be a conversation a little bit, and then you have to be open to the other person saying, well, he actually never said that he wanted it for here, and then he changed it to go. Like, I swear I asked the question, like, and you could hear that as not owning it, but like, if that's really what happened. So you have to be a little bit careful about which loop you're in.
You touched a little bit on something that I want you to talk a little bit about more. You said that when you're in the coaching loop, they're owning it, that you give a lot of grace. And I think that's really difficult to do when you're like, oh, there should be common sense, right? But the person is saying the right things, trying the right things. At what point do you say, like, okay, it's no longer coaching, you're owning it, but it's not working? Like, is there a moment where something switches to accountability there?
Yeah, and I think it's the owning it piece again. Like, are you still working towards making it better? So I think, like, initially, like, you evaluate the employee. So if it's somebody who'd been, like, we keep talking about the coffee shop, if that person had been with you for 10 years and they're a rock star employee most of the time and they're having a bad day, like, I'm going to give you a lot more grace. And, like, I'm going to be less likely to be in that accountability loop. I'm being more likely to be in the coaching loop. And even if you come back and say, like, I'm not owning it, why are you picking on me today? I'm going to give you a little bit of grace, then come back and talk to you and say, you're okay. Like, you're having a bad day. So I'm going to acknowledge the real situation involved. But then if they're not getting better, it could be possible that you fail in the coaching loop too. This is, I think, one of the hardest things about management. Management is a lot like poker. You can play your hand perfectly and still lose. You might have somebody, and I always use my mom as an example. She was a teller supervisor at a credit union a long time ago, and she had a teller who really struggled with counting, with numbers. There just wasn't a detail person, and you can't be a teller if you struggle with counting. Like, and so he would make a lot of errors in terms of giving too much change or not enough change or not counting things. And so he struggled with balancing his drawer, but he was great at customer service. But it's a small company. There's no place for somebody to just do customer service without doing counting. And so he'd always owned the mistakes and always felt bad about it, but never could improve ultimately. And so my mom actually did end up having to let him go. But again, you can do that in a good way. It wasn't, I'm angry with you. You've really failed me. You're fired. Get out. It was you shouldn't do this job. I love you. You're great in customer service, but you should go find a job where you don't have to count and you can do customer service. Like, and if we were a bigger company and we had that here, I would totally hire you for that. And by the way, I will write you a recommendation for a job that does not include counting, but does include customer service. Like that's the job you should be looking for, and I will help you with that. So ultimately, we do have to hold people accountable for performance, even if they're owning something. So you do have to keep closing the loop. It's not that it's always going to get better. I think, frankly, a lot of us as managers, what happens is we have an ego and our ego gets the best of us. And we think, I'm going to make that person better. I'm going to make sure you're successful. And that's just not your job as a manager. Your job is not to make the other person successful. That is not your job. I'm going to say that one more time for managers that are out there, because a lot of you just went like, wait, what? Your job as a manager is not to make your people successful. Your job as a manager is to help your people to succeed or fail quickly. That's what your job as a manager is. The real job in terms of being successful is goes to the other person. And your job is to help the other person be successful if they want to be. The problem is the other person may not be capable of doing it, or they may not want to do it. And if either one of those two things are ultimately true and you can't get them out of that, that may not be your fault. You can manage somebody perfectly and it still doesn't work out at the end of the day. But fortunately, most people can work out in jobs, especially like as as somebody who's the front line of a Starbucks. You should be able to do that job. Most people should be able to do that job. It's just highlighting what the expectations are through radical clarity. So let's talk. So last thoughts here, last tips for our audience who is trying to figure out how to manage people through dumbassery.
I mean, I love the management cycle because it works not just for quote unquote common sense, right? It doesn't just work for these like little very frustrating incidents. It works on a much bigger scale too for directors, for VPs, right? Anybody who has to manage anybody, it works for that too, right? Don, you would use the same cycle to manage me, right? And I think that makes you a better manager if you can apply a system top to bottom, bottom to top, everybody. And it just shows that it is the same cycle over and over. It's just how you do it with each person. And I think
Yeah,
it's really
that's a
cool.
great point. Yeah, whether you're leading executives or not, you're still managing people.
Absolutely.
I can think of a team that we work with where top executive got some pretty hard feedback from their team on certain terms of some engagement scores. And the executive's not owning it. The executive's like, well, that's their problem, not my problem. And so now the CEO is looking at that executive going like, well, how do I manage that person? And I'm like, same way, same way. Well, that's not acceptable in our organization. So what are you going to do if you continue that and you don't decide to address that? I'm going to have to bring somebody in that does. And that's the accountability loop, even on an executive level. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to add, in our family, there's a lot of lawyers or judges. And so they often talk about, all of the laws based on the understanding that the quote, would a reasonable person fill in the blank, right? That's the question for a jury to decide. And it's similar, I think, in leadership and management. You're like, would a reasonable person, would a common sense person do this? And the reason we have laws is because I don't think there's that many reasonable people out there. You can't be reasonable all the time. Employees can't figure all this stuff out for themselves all the time. Leadership is really using your influence to paint a picture of success. So I think that management loop is really powerful because so much of your role is just painting a picture of success and then seeing how your team can develop on that. And if you're frustrated, whether it's an executive you're coaching that you think should know better or a frontline person that you're coaching or holding accountable that you think should know better, I think the exciting thing we've seen is that more and more leaders can actually grow in their own skill of holding people accountable or coaching them. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. If you're frustrated and mad at your team, part of this answer is that then it really goes back to you. How are you helping them own by knowing and bringing awareness and what the painted picture of success is, or how are you holding them accountable? So really the solution is you, and that's work, but that's also encouraging. So you're not a victim of the situation. People need to be trained. People need to be developed. People need to be held accountable. Hence you.
Yeah. If all of your people are lazy and dumb, it's something you're doing. That's the reality. But the good news about that, as Philip just said, is that there's something you can do about that. You don't have to fix an entire generation of people or all these folks that you're finding. It's you can fix yourself. And imagine if everybody in your organization were great managers, all the way from the CEO managing their people at the top, all the way to frontline supervisors. If everybody did that job right, every organization would work a lot better. They would make more money, they would be more profitable, they would have higher engagement levels, all the things. So that's why we want to bring this topic to you. So thanks a lot for joining us on this episode of the People Centric Podcast. As always, send us more ideas. We're always looking for more things. We're not running out of topics here, but we love to hear what you're struggling with so that we can bring that back to you. So we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead well.